When you think about super successful businesses that are selling through the roof like Heinz or Mattel, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But there's a secret. The business behind the business making selling simple for them and buying simple for their customers. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout as Heinz and Mattel. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/promo.
Wow.
What's up?
I just bought and financed a car through Carvana in minutes.
You? The person who agonized 4 weeks over whether to paint your walls eggshell or off-white bought and financed a car in minutes?
They made it easy. Transparent terms, customizable down and monthly. Didn't even have to do any paperwork.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Hey, have you checked out that spreadsheet I sent you for our dinner options?
Finance your car with Carvana and experience total control. Financing subject to credit approval.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Music, the show that looks at the money behind the music industry with me, Steve Lamack, and Music Allies Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge. You might have to do most of the heavy lifting, I think, this week, Stuart, as you might be able to tell. I only arrived back from Austin yesterday afternoon on our slightly delayed flight, so I am a wee bit tired, has to be said.
You're looking fresher than I thought, actually, so if that's any consolation.
Thank you very much. It was, I've got to say, South by is, there's always interesting facets to it. So I've been at South by Southwest, which is still, it's a massive showcase festival. It's also where the music industry from all over the world go to discuss the things that are bothering them or their exciting new ideas. I'm not sure if anything really gets sorted out in terms of global policy or where it takes the music industry, but there are so many panels that at least I think that some of them throw up some interesting ideas, and it's also a place where you can gauge what the music industry is thinking. You can certainly work out what the hot topics are, and they're most of the things which we've talked about on this podcast particularly over the last few months. So there were numerous panels discussing, of course, the different facets of AI and the implications of what AI means for music and culture and just the rest of the social landscape in a way. There was one panel which was called AI, a Utopian Dream or a Dystopian Nightmare. And then there was one called Hi, I'm Your Future, Cultivating Long-Term Wellbeing with AI, which I must admit didn't go to that one. I also missed, and I wish I'd gone to this, but I imagine this would be your dream panel. This, Stuart, it was called From Data Deluge to Data Strategy, which essentially was a lesson in helping artists to extract interesting data from DSPs and social media. So there's some helpful panels there, and obviously all sorts of workshops. You could book mentoring sessions with people who work for major labels and publishers. There was one, and again going back to topics we've discussed, there was one whole panel which was dedicated to the mechanics of how you capture the superfan market, which, as you've said, is something which the music industry has spent a lot of time. They see a lot of money there, like billions of pounds potentially of money to be made from fans who will go the extra yard or the extra dollar in their case. So it was all that sort of stuff. And then, there's, as well as all that, which was going on at the conference centre, there's all the music. I think the official figure was somewhere in the region of 1,000 artists playing across 5 days. 1,000 artists. That's
how many did you see? How many?
I was going to say that's a lot of gigs. That's too many gigs even for me. How many did we see? We saw 40 plus, 50 plus artists from Tuesday night to Friday night when we're finished. But yeah, and some interest. A very healthy UK presence. Once again, I was slightly worried that because of the cost, that this year maybe more artists would decide that maybe the investment wasn't worth it. But no, both in terms of the number of British artists out there and the quality actually was really good. The diversity of the sort of music we were taking to America, I think, was really impressive. And I was stopped a few times in the street by people saying that they'd been to see some of the UK showcases and were pretty impressed. But it was so the venue moved again. So what basically happens is a group of organisations, including obviously Department of Business and Trade at the centre of it, set up camp in a venue, this year's venue. And it was right back in the centre of Austin. So right in the middle of the festival on 6th Street, there's a club called Palm Door. And that's what became known this year as the British Music Embassy. And it was, as I say, it was nearly a week of artist showcase gigs, which drew some really big crowds as well.
That's good to know.
So it's 2 stages, 1 in, 1 out, 7 artists on each shift. So there was a gig in the afternoon and another one in the evening. There were also gigs for the nations. Pretty much had their own showcases as well. There was a very strong Irish contingent this year. In fact, I bumped into the manager of a band called Gurias, who we saw the first night we arrived, and they were supposed to play last year, didn't play last year. So in a way, they've been building up to this for 2 years, but they were on fire this week. But I saw their manager, so having got off the red-eye flight, I bumped into Guria's manager, who was saying that they'd pretty much just gone out there to find an American live agent, because at their stage of their career, that's what they thought would be really helpful for them next. And they had plenty of interest from agents out there after their shows this week, plus some record label interest, which they weren't really expecting. So, I mean, there were quite a few examples of the trip, being a success for groups, because it's a financial gamble in a way, because it's not cheap getting there. You've got to pay for your flights, your accommodation, the visas, of course, because the visa cost has shot up in recent years to, what is it now? It's somewhere in the region of £1,500 per musician, I think. And so that's a big ask for anyone, really. So you're gambling this investment on getting something out of it. And I think what I'd say to any artist who's thinking of going is the timing of your trip, it should coincide with having already built some momentum. You've got a reason for going. Like Gurias, we want to find an American agent, or we need an American co-manager. And then when you get out there, you've really got to make the most of it. I mean, I bumped into, there was a band called Himalayas, not the best known of the UK artists out there, but they were stopping and talking to people and handing out promos for the new album, and just getting amongst things, really. So as well as playing gigs, I think they really tried to make the most of their time out there. And, if you've got a reason for going, I mean, you can still go out and have a good time. Don't get me wrong. And I think some artists, even if they've arrived and it's not worked out quite as well as they'd hoped, you will, of course. It's an amazing experience for a musician. But go with a reason for going, I think, because it's a huge cash investment, which again is, why I think the majority of artists went there, or were able to go there, because they'd managed to get one of the grants which are available, which we sometimes talk about, the MEGS grant, or obviously there's people like the PRS Foundation and Arts Council and various local music group grants, which you can get to part fund your trip. But that's, it's still, you are still going to have to save up some money to get out there and make the most of it. But as I say, it's an experience, however well you do. I bumped into one of the... so there's a young lad called Reggie who performs under the name Black Fondue. And not only was it his first time at South by, it was his first trip ever to America. And he was absolutely loving it. He gets to play, 3 or 4 shows and meet some people, and it was a great experience. Cheaper for him because there's essentially just just him.
I remember you saying, wasn't it, wall-to-wall singer-songwriters because of the economics of being a band nowadays.
Yeah, I'd say 30% upwards of the 1,000 artists were solo artists. It was a pretty good South by, and I got to see Big Special play in a car park next to Interstate 35. So there's a car park, a small gazebo. And I took some film of this with in the background just these huge American trucks going by. I mean, it was really. Oh, you are definitely in the States now, boy. As these huge trucks motor up and down the highway next to them. But I'll tell you the other thing about that, because it wasn't an official gig, because there's loads of, as soon as you get out of the centre, there's loads of unofficial showcases. So it was great. So it's it's a punk rock gig in a car park. I mean, it wasn't the best attended gig I've seen. They were amazing though. They were brilliant. But out of the scant audience who were there, who was there? James, our friend James the Joiner. James, who is one of our Patreon subscribers, who lives in Austin, who you might remember took part in our Christmas Patreon pop quiz. So I met James. It was lovely. Thanks, James. Nice to bump into you again. So that was good. So, I mean, it's the other thing for us is just being able to, go and meet some people, or bumping into, old friends, or, making new ones, to random strangers in the street who stop you and say you should be another half a mile down the road in a Cajun, some sort of Mexican food shack has got a punk rock gig going on today, or so-and-so from New Zealand is playing. But it was, and it was also, because it usually coincides with spring break, which brings in an awful lot of people, because all of a sudden, spring break, what we're going to do, we've got a massive music festival on our doorstep. That's where we're all going to go. But it wasn't spring break week, so it meant it was a bit easier walking around and getting to places. But it's still a massive thing, and massive for Austin as well. I think last year's, they reckoned, South by Southwest benefited the Austin economy to the tune of £370 million or something. So it's big still, and if you can go, if you can afford to go, it's a great experience. Anyway, I'm back and slightly hoarse, but it's nice to be home. What have I missed? Because apart from all the stuff I saw out there, what have I missed at home? Can you talk us through some of the stories which have happened in the last few days? Because I'm slightly, as they say, out of the loop. I noticed you mentioned something about Spotify sharing some new figures on its royalty payouts for artists and songwriters. What's this about?
Yeah, there's been a lot of Spotify news this week, as there always is, actually. The show's more than usual. But yeah, this is its website called Loud and Clear, which I don't even remember last year. I think it might have been when you were at South by Southwest last year. I interviewed Spotify about this report. So it's like an annual. That's right. Yeah, it's a website that comes, and every year they update it, and it's got figures on their payouts from artist music. And it's you can think of it as like Spotify's "We're Not the Bad Guys" initiative, in that it's them saying, look, I think more artists are making more money, and here's how the money gets paid out. And it's just trying to be transparent about some of the figures that often get speculated around.
Right.
So one way to look at it is kind of with a big sort of pinch of salt, and say, well, of course they'd say this. It all shows they're brilliant. This is kind of propaganda. And a lot of people do say that on the internet when this site is updated every year. But the other thing is actually, in terms of being transparent and giving out payout figures, Spotify kind of is on its own. Like, its rivals don't really do this. So you can sort of learn a lot from the numbers it puts out, even if you have that pinch of salt handy to understand that there is a narrative here of everything being great, and you have to sort of see between those lines.
Yeah.
So I picked out a couple of findings that I thought were interesting. I mean, the first one was, and this is something people know anecdotally, but it's good to have numbers for it, this explosion in how many people are uploading music to Spotify. So last year, they gave this stat out saying 10 million people had uploaded music to Spotify ever. That's how many people would ever upload at least one track.
Yeah.
And that's grown to 12 million in the last year. So there's like 2 million more people, 20% more, uploading songs, which is kind of, it could be hobbyists, people just doing it casually. It could be brand new artists, obviously. It could be people using AIs which is something else we've been talking about. But this explosion in the uploaders, but there's also a separate stat, which is Spotify calculates how many artists are actually trying to make a living from their music.
Oh, okay.
And this is based on a combination of how many tracks, like they've released more than 10 tracks. They've got a certain level of streams, and also they've played at least one ticketed concert. So that's kind of thing. And it reckons those people, there's 225,000 of them, which is the same as last year. So basically what you've had is 2 million more people uploading music to Spotify, but actually a number who are really trying to make a living from music hasn't grown at all.
Right.
So I thought that was quite interesting. It's like there's this boom in stuff that really isn't being listened to much, but is on there. So that was kind of interesting.
What do you think Spotify will take away from that then? Do you think that backs up their reasoning for demonetizing, in some ways, for not paying out on what is it? If you get less than 1,000 plays, you don't get paid for it.
That's it. Yeah, less than 1,000 in the last year. Yeah.
Is this sort of, does that go hand in hand with these figures that they're presuming from the amount of people who are trying to do it professionally, that where they got all this music being put up by, as you say, people who aren't engaging in the same way or might not have the same ambition?
I think it does. I think it sharpens their focus in that the important figure there is not the 12 million uploaders. It's the 225,000 people who want. And so Spotify's argument when it makes changes is we're trying to funnel more money towards those people who are trying to make it from music. Mm-hmm. Last year's one, they had this idea, this example they used of football, and they said, well, millions and millions of people play football. Only a very few make money from playing football, and who are professionals. And you don't think that everyone should get paid for playing Sunday League down the park?
No.
And they were saying that should. So this is the way things are shifting a little bit, which is. Yeah.
I'm thinking but the thing, if you continue with that metaphor though, that doesn't mean that it's where does professional end and amateur begin? And even if you're an enthusiastic amateur, you are probably worth, even if you're playing in non-league football, you might be getting 50 quid or 100 quid a week. And so how far down before you basically say, we're not going to pay you because you're a hobbyist? I think that's the thing which worries artists particularly is, okay, if I'm just chucking some tracks up there, I don't really expect I'm going to make much money out of it. But there will be people who, are popular locally or, have a small following. As I say, the non-league, go down the non-league in football. There's, some games in the quite lower divisions, they get 200 people go to a game. So they're still doing something which is of value to an audience, and therefore think, pay us 20 quid. Got to pay for a new pair of boots.
It's true, and I think that's the other thing that comes out of these figures. Is like the other thing, Spotify has this page on its website with bubbles of like, here's how many artists that generated more than 10 grand of royalties last year. Here's how many generated more than 50 grand, up to like 10 million, I think it is.
Right,
and you can see how many. And bear in mind, this is how much royalties they generated. And they would have been paid to labels and publishers, and you don't know how much of that the artist sees. That's always the kind of caveat.
Yeah.
But so of everyone on Spotify, 71,200 generated more than $10,000 on Spotify last year. Okay. Which and Spotify reckons it's a quarter of the overall thing. So they reckon those people would have generated 40 grand overall from all the streaming services and all the sales of music. So if there's like 225,000 people trying to make a living from music, only 71,000 of them have made $40,000 from streaming services last year,
right.
Which is not an income, especially if you're a band.
Yeah.
Especially if you're into so in a way, these figures do show that, like, you may say this is how many people are trying to make a living, but a lot of them still aren't making a living. Even if you start throwing in live revenues, merch, there are other ways to make money.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. And this is not like a gotcha for Spotify. I think it's quite good that they're putting this out because it lets us do those sums and say, well, here's how streaming is paying off for these people, but not those people. And it sometimes fuels the criticism of them as well as people who support them. So in a way, it's quite a good thing they're doing this.
This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV, it's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
I was never really a runner. The way I see running is a gift, especially when you have stage 4 cancer. I'm Anne. I'm running the Boston Marathon, presented by Bank of America. I run for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to give people like me a chance to thrive in life, even with cancer.
Join Bank of America in helping Anne's cause. Give if you can at BofA.com/supportAnne. What would you like the power to do? References to charitable organizations is not an endorsement by Bank of America Corporation. Copyright 2025.
So that's Spotify trying to, as you say, be transparent and be the good guys in a week where I don't know if that's played out particularly well in all the stories around Spotify this week.
Well, so this is a wider trend, I think, of Spotify is currently having a little bit of a moment of, are we the bad guys in popular perception? And this goes down to things like there's been a lot more stories in recent months about how much money its executives are making from selling their shares. So I think before Christmas, MBW had a story about Daniel Ek, the CEO, selling, I think it was 666 million of shares or something, like some kind of devilish figure. So there's been that kind of stuff. They have much more coverage of how much money the executives are making and then contrasting that with some of the criticism. But yeah, last week was particularly difficult because there were a huge hoo-ha erupted around Spotify in the UK. How am I aware of you of Andrew Tate? Like how much has he impinged on your consciousness?
I'm aware of his appearances on the news.
Okay, yeah. So he's the world's top pants selfieing misogynist influencer. Is how I describe him. An unpleasant guy. If I'm honest, like he put a lot of that teaching young men how they should deal with women, how they should go about their lives. A lot of it is quite grim, sexist stuff, and even worse. Anyway, he's got a bunch of podcasts, and they're called courses, as if they're educational courses. One was called the Pimpin' Hose degree, so a PhD, teaching men how to attract with women, how to sleep with them. Some quite nasty, coercive, manipulative stuff in it. I had to read through the transcript to cover the news story. Anyway, this was on Spotify, and I'm going to call out a woman here, Renee Chopping, her name is. I hope I've pronounced that right. She's an activist and a program director who works with survivors of sex trafficking, and she started an online petition saying, "Take this stuff down, Spotify. It's dangerous." And you know how a lot of online petitions, you launch it and tell everyone about it and it gets 3,000 signatures, no one cares. This one has 146,000 signatures. It's been adding like 10 to 20,000 a day over the last week, generating a lot of news. And the result was Spotify took some of this guy's shows down, including the Pimpin' Hose degree, which was the one that got most coverage. So that petition is having an effect. And now she's saying, right, we're pushing on and getting all of it taken down. But it's also, so last week has been the first time I've seen this was in the press. I saw a few music industry friends posting on places like LinkedIn saying, I'm cancelling my subscription. This is the last straw for me, which I haven't seen before. And that's a hugely small self-selecting group of my music industry nerd friends. But I've not seen them do this before. Not seen anyone get so cross that they cancel. So it has been a difficult week in that regard, because Loud and Clear was about saying, look, we're not bad for artists. Everything is improving and here's why. But at the same time, there's a lot of stuff in the press about people saying we're not sure about the culture of this service. We're not sure about their policies. We don't like the fact that Andrew Tate is trying to make money on there and they're not taking him down. So it's a tricksy time, I think, for them, that whenever there is a good news story, a lot of the comments are, yes, but look at this over here or that, or look at songwriters still being cross. And it's difficult to get ahead of this sometimes for them.
Okay. I did see in two of the venues, in the urinals of two of the venues in Austin, there were stickers for basically a new streaming platform. The name of which I can't remember off the top of my head at the moment, but the slogan at the top of the sticker just said, "Delete Spotify, you coward."
Wow. In a way, that's quite a good campaign because you saw it, but it's not a great campaign because no one's remembering the name of the company. They're just remembering the slogan.
It was in a bad font. Apart from anything else. Talking of royalties and royalty rates, here's another story. Apparently, independent labels are unhappy about the changes to the way Amazon Music pays royalties, with some saying that as much as they think as much as 70% of their music has been demonetized overnight. Now, this sounds like a worrying change. What's happened here?
Yeah, it does. So this story starts at the end of December, actually, when Amazon Music, one of the big streaming services, signed a license deal with Universal Music. Right. And as part of that, there were lots of talk about the advancement of artist-centric principles, which is Universal Music's sort of thing about how we should change streaming payouts to make sure artists get more money and it all goes well. But then the week before last, just before you went away, Impala, the independent industry organization, they put out this statement criticizing UMG about buying up independent music firms. This is a separate argument.
Right.
But in that criticism, they threw in this claim about Amazon Music. And yeah, they said that basically, and I'll quote them, independents are being asked to sign terms with Amazon based on thresholds that have a disproportionate impact on their artists and revenue. And like you said, with some of them reporting around 70% of their repertoire, so 70% of the tracks on the catalogue, being demonetized. So we've talked about just now, thresholds is the idea of when a streaming service says, right, if you haven't got this many listeners or this many streams, you're going to earn a lower royalty rate or no royalties at all. So Spotify has done this, Deezer has done this. It seems to be part of this shift that's going on. And I followed up with Amazon Music, obviously, because you're like, hey, someone said this about you, what's happening? And they did give a statement saying that this royalty model update aims to ensure that artists have an opportunity to benefit from streaming, including independent artists and labels, many of whom will see a positive boost in royalty payouts as a result of the move to the model. So Amazon is saying we have changed the way we pay out. They haven't said how, haven't given the exact calculation, but they're saying actually a lot of independent artists will see more royalties. So it's kind of a they said situation at the moment where we're not sure which labels have had 70% of their tracks demonetized. We're not sure which artists are benefiting, according to Amazon, but it kind of is it is like a reminder that this stuff is going on behind the scenes, that changes to the way everything is calculated. And it's only when someone complains about it or when someone says, here's how we're doing it, that we know.
I mean, it makes you feel incredibly powerless, I imagine, if you're an artist or a label, because the goalposts can move at any point. I mean, that's one of the things, isn't it?
Well, people are worried, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah. It would be great to know who the artists are, it would be great to know what the threshold is, where they've stopped paying artists, how much money that makes them by not paying that money out to a certain level of artists. How much do they get from that? And then how are they redistributing it to the more popular artists? Is that right?
Yeah. And one of the things in the Spotify announcement last week was that half of their payouts go to independent music. And that has stayed the same since last year. So Spotify has demonetized some tracks, but Indie's share has held up, which is actually quite a positive sign. But that makes you think, actually, it's not just, and when Spotify says that, what it's saying is we're really good for independent music. It's really good. We're really good for it. But you could flip that round and say it shows that independent music is really important for Spotify and for streaming. So if it's half your payouts, it's really important to you. And so I think when you decide to change about how you calculate payouts, which seemingly is largely driven by Universal Music saying, we think this should change. So it's the biggest major label sort of almost driving these changes. Shouldn't you be going out and explaining them to independent labels really properly? Shouldn't you be getting their opinions before you do it? Shouldn't you be treating them like as important as they seem to be from the payout stats, rather than them having to complain that, oh, these changes were made and now we're losing out and we didn't really get... Like, it feels like there's an imbalance between who's driving these changes and actually who it's affecting and whether they should have a say. So yeah.
Okay. Next, Sony Music says it's taken down more than 75,000 AI deepfakes, which were based on artists like Harry Styles, Queen, and Beyonce.
Yeah. So this is really fun because, well, not fun. This is really interesting because there's this government consultation that we talked about going on about how AI training should work, and everyone is giving it their views. And Sony Music kind of, it submitted its views and it briefed a couple of journalists on what it had said. And it threw in these figures on deepfakes, which isn't really what the consultation is mainly about. But yeah, saying that 75,000, it could be music tracks, it could be videos, it could be, we're not sure exactly what it is, but it's stuff that is pretending to be Harry Styles, Queen, Beyonce, other artists. And this is kind of in the very early days of this technology rolling out and being available. So, the implication is 75,000 is probably small change compared to in a year's time, 2 years' time. And it is, do you remember when we were talking about, I was using AI music services and trying to do stuff. And one of the things you can't do is you can't say, create me a song based on Queen, because it will say, sorry, I can't do artist names. So you end up having to say, do me a song based on operatic hard rock from the 1970s with a singer with a moustache. And, you have to kind of find ways around to do it. But there are other ways where you can sort of go onto internet forums and you can say, right, I want to buy this clone of Harry Styles' voice and record a song with it. There's a whole flourishing economy of people helping you do that thing. So yeah, it's possible. This is the first time we've had a label say this is how much we're having to go and take it down.
Right.
And I think this is part of their argument that combating dodgy use of AI shouldn't be a case of you having to go and squash every single one like you're playing whack-a-mole. And they talked about, they used quite a fun metaphor actually in this submission. They said, right, this idea of in the music industry, you're going to have to say, we talked about opting out, haven't we? You're going to have to opt out of letting your music be used to train AIs and be used. And Sony is against that. And it said, well, would the government require homeowners to tag all their possessions to be protected against burglary? So, unless you say my TV can't be nicked, it's fair game for burglars and nothing can be done, So this is all part of the argument with the industry having. And I've got a bit of gossip, actually. We talked a couple of weeks ago, I think, about how the industry had launched this huge campaign, hadn't it, to say the government, do a U-turn, don't do the plans you were going to do.
Yeah.
And at the time, there was a report the day after, I think, saying the government was considering, listening to them and doing something. But in the last week, we've heard of a couple of people who should know, who are kind of close to the lobbying side of our industry, saying they're not feeling very confident. They're quite downbeat. They don't think the government's going to listen. They sort of think the AI growth at all costs argument will trump the don't destroy our creative industries argument. So in a way, optimism has been just sort of streaming away a little bit in the industry. So which may be why Sony Music went so kind of public, saying, look, here's a submission, here's this big, terrible stat. I think the industry is fighting back. But yeah, there's a little bit of a change of confidence over whether the government's listening. So we have to keep an eye on that.
Okay. A new app has launched, and it's been launched by RAC, not the car breakdowns people, it says here, which is disappointing, really, because an app launched by RAC, a music app launched by the RAC, would have been a good story. But it's not. It's the electronic music artist who is encouraging fans to review albums to help them be discovered. Tell us more about this.
Well, so stop me when you realize how innovative this is. Like, imagine if people could write about whether albums are good or not. And other people could read that and decide accordingly. Why hasn't anyone tried this before in any medium? But no, this is kind of, I quite like this. So this is something that's missing from streaming, isn't it? Like there aren't album reviews in streaming. You can't go on Spotify and read someone saying this is great, this is not great. And music media has had a famously tough time, whether it's magazines closing or websites struggling to earn money, music journalists going into other jobs because there's no money, and it's been a tough time. And so this guy RAC, he's actually a really interesting guy. He's an electric music artist. He's independent. He's got control. He's always had this record of trying out technologies and working with startups and launching his own things. And so this is an app called Factory FM, which you may hear Tony Wilson spitting in his grave around now. Nothing to do with the Manchester factory. And yeah, you can go on there, you can rate and review albums, you can browse other reviews. They've got some artists on there doing it too. And he's asked people, he doesn't want people to kind of just come and list everything they've ever listened to. It's not like a sort of a collection thing. Mm-hmm. He wants people to kind of write meaningful stuff about albums they love or the memories associated with them. He wants it to be kind of somewhere you share interesting, thoughtful stories about albums. And yeah, they've got more than 2,500 people been using it in its sort of beta test. I don't know how it makes money. Like this stuff is notoriously hard to make money from. But I quite like the idea that there's all this conversation around music that is just not present on the streaming services at all. Like you can see a playlist on Spotify or Apple Music, but you can't really read what people think about something, or you can't. I mean, there was a time, oh God, it's like 10 or more years ago, where Spotify did these deals with music publishers and said, okay, the NME and people could actually have their reviews appear in Spotify when you're listening to stuff, or to help you find things. Yeah. And that fell by the wayside later on. But yeah, so it's kind of it's just another attempt to reinvent that idea of people are talking about music. How can you use that as a place to find stuff? But yeah, what would be nicer would be doing it on the streaming service, I think, rather than a standalone app.
Yeah. Finally, this week, a group of university students who just also happen to be fans of this show have published a new report on the music economy of Gloucestershire. This sounds great. So what is it? What does it entail? Who are they? Do we know all their names?
Do you know, I was looking at there's a few too many of them to list one by one, but yeah, it's a group of students at the University of Gloucestershire.
Yeah.
And they're working with there's this team called Out the Box Productions, who are kind of a team of music business academics. So they're looking at music business through the lens of academia.
Right.
And yeah, they did a survey of 102 people in Gloucestershire about everything from like how musicians make money to the impact of COVID and Brexit. It looked at dynamic pricing. So your mate, John Collins from Live, is interviewed in this report.
Oh, great, yeah.
The local gigs and festivals circuit. And it's really like a lot of the things we've talked about on a global scale. It's trying to drill that down and say, what does it mean for people in this county, in this part of the world? And it's interesting. And like this, it makes some conclusions that like, there's this really exciting generation of artists who are ambitious and ready, but just the support for them is still hard to find. And they talk about the idea of you need to strengthen the local infrastructure everywhere, not just in the big cities. Yeah, because there are artists there. And it talks about also breaking down a perception and trust between the industry and the audience. And it sort of says, you know, more transparency, like fans being more aware of how artists make their money and the challenges they face. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, it's really hyper local. It's focused on this particular part of the UK. But I think a lot of its findings, you could just like apply them to a lot of different parts of the UK too. Like this idea of looking super local can give you these thoughts that apply much more widely. So even if you're not in Gloucestershire, there's something interesting there.
But I think, do you know what? I think this could be really valuable, and it's certainly, be a real lesson for, you know, some other parts of the country. I mean, here's the first thing: there's probably anything which changes our thought processes about music in this country is good. So talking to actual music fans, that's good, isn't it? Or talking to people about how they relate with music is good. But so much of, I think, obviously with the music industry, so much of it based in London, then, you know, people, whether it's industry figures or tastemakers, base quite a lot of judgment on what's happening in London. Anything to tell you more about what's happening. Because the other thing is that every part of the UK has its own different music scene and its own different audiences, and they all, you know, they all interact in slightly different ways. I mean, everyone goes to gigs, but, you know, why, what sort of gigs, what experience do they have? All this knowledge would be great to have. So the idea that, doing it in Gloucestershire, well done, because, you know, it'd be great to have something like this from Yorkshire or from around Merseyside, and you can see, you know, the slight differences, but also anything that rams home the fact that, you know, there is a music industry out there, and brings us more information about how people interact with music and what they want from music and how they feel the music industry is doing. That's terrific, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's not a brand new thing, but this discipline of like examining music's impact on the places it is. Like there's a whole string of research on music cities, which is like, how should town planning be adapted for music? There's people looking at local scenes. I feel like it's an open door. And so I think you can find this report. I think if you Google the music economy of Gloucestershire, like there's not much SEO competition on Google for it because that hasn't been done before. You know, this is why it's so interesting. And you can find a way to report. And I think, maybe, like you say, maybe someone in Yorkshire will see this report and go, we could do that here. Let's do that here. And it becomes a little ripple effect, and you end up learning a lot more about what's needed to help these local scenes.
Also, anything that makes excuse me, anything that makes pop music slightly more higher brow, I'm definitely in favour of.
Yeah.
Right, that'll have to do it for this week. Thank you, as always, for listening. Thank you very much, everyone. If you have enjoyed the show, please do tell your friends and subscribe in your podcast app. That helps the figures. Give us a review if you can, but tell a few mates about what we're doing here. You can also support the programme through our aforementioned Patreon page, where you can become a Price of Music fan or super fan for as little as £2 a month. You'll find us at patreon.com/thepriceofmusic. And any questions you have for us, any financial facts you'd like us to try and track down, or insights into any areas of the music industry which you'd like to understand more, drop us a line with your inquiries. We'll do some more of those in future weeks. The Price of Music Podcast at gmail.com is the address. Till next time, look after yourselves. Ta-ra.